Everybody, welcome back. The goal of today's video is to do the final block prep and cleaning to 1113's new engine block. I've got some stuff on there, we'll get to that in a minute, but when I do the final cleaning on an engine block, for some reason that translates into all of the grit and grease and junk and rust that's still on there is just going to be transferred on to me. I don't know why that happens, but it works that way every time. So I'm decked out in my Sunday best. I've got the old junky curly hat on, as the viewers call it. The old Moline sweatshirt, which is what I use for cleaning anything that's bad. The pants with the holes in the knees, and some rubber shoes. So I'm pretty well ready to get this process started, but first I have one more little bit of housekeeping that I need to address with this engine block here. So, cam bearings. You guys are all well familiar with the new old stock ones that I was able to source from California. And I have the still good condition, minimally worn ones that I took out of 1113's frozen and cracked block. And I have the ones that are still in this block from its prior life. Well, I had every intention on driving these old cam bearings out and replacing them with my new old stock ones. But then I actually started looking at them, and they looked pretty darn good yet. So then I started measuring them, and now I'm kind of at an impasse. So after looking at all the bearing surfaces, they looked really good, and I couldn't see any appreciable wear marks at all. So I took my inside bore gauges and I measured these things about 4 different ways. And once you get that fitted where you just have a nice little drag inside there with everything centered, you check it with the outside micrometer, and I have this set stopped where I just have the slightest amount of drag between my bore gauge and the micrometer anvil, and I am at 2.250 inches round on all 3 of the cam bearings that are still in here. So here is the kicker. All 3 of the minimally worn cam bearings that I drove out of 1113's block are also 2.250 round. All 3 of my new old stock, brand new cam bearing finds, again 2.250 round on the ID. So that tells me, that actually confirms that not only do these cam bearings look good, these darn things really aren't even worn yet. Cam bearing wear just really doesn't seem to be a thing on these D3400 diesel engines, at least outside of like a base oil system failure where everything ran dry and they started pulling material and scoring. But you look at how wide these bearings are and the diameters of them compared to the relatively small amounts of pressure of load that a camshaft has to take to actuate the valve train system. They actually hold up pretty good. They almost have, I think, about 3 times as much bearing surface as what they would really need to survive in this lower RPM environment. But let's continue on with the inspection here. Now remember, this is 5J1113's original camshaft, and everything that I pulled out of that engine measured right at new spec. It was like a very low hour machine. So knowing that, I took the micrometer and I measured the front journal, the middle journal, and the back. We'll just use the back one because it's the most accessible right now. But with just a slight drag across that bearing surface, I get 2.246 inches bearing journal diameter. So we'll check that against the specs. We have camshaft, bearing journal diameter, 2.245 to the 2.246 that I have right now. So I verified all 3 journals on that cam are 2.246 and round. So those cam bearing journals are basically at brand new spec yet, and my cam bearing IDs are basically at brand new spec yet. So we take the 2.250 inside diameter I have on all 3 of my cam bearings, subtract the 2.246 bearing journal diameter on the cam, that gives me about a 4/1000ths running clearance. So we have bearing clearance 3 to 6/1000ths of an inch, maximum permissible clearance 10/1000ths. So basically I'm still running 4/1000ths of an inch. I am right in my brand new bearing clearance spec. What's the point in driving these old cam bearings out? Especially considering the fact that to get these 3 bearings out of 1113's old block, I was winding up and striking these with the driver pretty darn hard to make them move. They're quite a tight fit, in these D3400 diesel blocks, and the amount of adversity that I would have to put this engine block through to drive otherwise good cam bearings out, only to have to drive brand new cam bearings in that all have the same inside diameters and are all going to have the same running clearance on the same slow turning camshaft. It's, guys, in my world, it's just not worth putting this poor block through that for really no appreciable gain. There's really nothing that's going to change other than the fact that I could say I have brand new cam bearings in there. And granted, if this was a more modern diesel engine that I was working on at the dealership at work, there is absolutely zero chance at all that I would even consider reusing old cam bearings. But this is far from a modern diesel engine. I know what these things are. I know what they require. And I'll tell you right now, this is going to be just fine with the bearings that are in here on this cam. It literally isn't going to pay at all to change those out. And the thought of striking that engine block that has been good in every other way as hard as I can with a hammer, probably 50 or more times to get those old inserts out and get the new bearings in, I'm just not going to do it. Okay, it's not worth it. There's really no gain to be had. So we're moving on. So the final part of block cleaning that I need to do is the passageways that go through the engine block itself for lubricating the various different points of the engine. Most of the lubrication is distributed via the external oil manifold that's on this side of the block when it's all put together. You have the oil pump, which will supply the manifold through this hole right here. It's a passageway of all of about that long, and it gets distributed through that manifold and goes both ways. You have these smaller 1/4 inch holes like in this rear port right here. We skip one. We have a 1/4 inch hole right there in that middle one, and then we skip one, and then we have the 1/4 inch hole right here. Those are the 3 feeds for the cam bearings. The 5/16 diameter holes above them, which are on all 5 of these bosses, are what feed oil to the main bearings via these hollow dowels that are in each one of these saddles here that retain the bearing inserts themselves. So that's a pretty simple oiling system really compared to a lot of the engine blocks that I've been in. Probably the most complicated passage on this whole block is this 5/16 passage right here that not only feeds this front main bearing, but also you can see where the passageway is inside this area of the case right here. It goes on forward and then exits the front of the block in this area through this hole right here, where it also lubricates your idler gear and accessory shaft. So that's probably the most complicated and longest passage throughout this entire piece. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of a manual pre-cleaning on those passages. I got a couple different diameters of bore brushes here and a pan of some solvent. So I'll get a bunch of solvent on the brush, have a rag here to catch any overflow, and just start running it through these passages, pulling all the big chunks out. As you can see, there's still some junk in there. Like I said, this is just going to be the manual kind of pre-cleaning. We'll blast all this out with the pressure washer when I'm done here. Okay, so I got all the passages clean, and now the final stage of block prep, block cleaning can begin. I'm outside, I got the pressure washer, and I positioned the block on this flat chunk of aluminum so I can blast on this thing all day long and not kick up any dirt and inhibit any of my progress. So what I like to do with these is just to spray them down with a good cleaner. I'm just using Purple Power today. It's biodegradable. It's about the same as Simple Green. Use that stuff too with great success. But I just coat all the surfaces with this and let it sit for a little while. I even got a little brush I can come out and scrub if anything looks like it's extra dirty. So basically, We'll soak it all down with this stuff. Whole exterior. Let it sit for a bit. Then I'll turn the pressure washer on it and blast it all off. And once that's done, I'll flip this thing over and get the inside of it done too. Okay, now we do the bottom side, and this is where we are going to be very conscious of the oil passages. Make sure we blast all that stuff out really well. And I can hear some of you guys probably thinking right now, aren't you afraid of blasting all this oil and grease all over the ground? Well, I say not really, because there really isn't much for oil and grease left in this thing. John Diesel and Digger pretty well baked this thing out in their big parts washer before they sent it to me, which removed the bulk of it. And anything else I've done since has been excuse me, has been basically pre-cleaning all these oil passages, getting any kind of gunk that may have still been left in those out. So pretty much all that there is left to clean out of this thing is like sediment from those water jackets from when I pulled the sleeves, any kind of fine rust dust from buffing these surfaces, any kind of fine little pieces of metal from running the flat file over the gasket areas, you know, stuff like that. So there really isn't anything left in here that's very harmful to anything at all. Alright, well, after all that messing around, I'm finally convinced that this block is clean, it's prepped, and it's ready to start putting some new parts back into. To get it dried off, I just rolled it out into the sun and used a lot of compressed air to get everything blown out of all the threaded holes and all the nooks and crannies. And then I also let it sit out in the sun for about 2 hours and just kind of finish baking out, let it heat up a little bit, and it actually cleaned up pretty nice. I really didn't have a whole lot of flash rust to worry about because of the dry nature of the air today and the sunshine. It actually dried itself out pretty quick, but you're always kind of trying to strike a balance between you know, getting something super clean with water, which a lot of times I prefer water to solvents because water will take out a lot of the real fines that the solvents will leave behind. But then you also have to worry about you know, flash rust and things starting to get that brownish tint to them because, you know, you had some bare clean metal and you got it wet. But basically, after you go and blast one of those out, the clock's ticking and you just need to stay on it. You need to go and get that thing dried out as soon as possible and just stick with it. Like, you know, that's a time where your cell phone is always going to ring and someone's always going to want to bend your ear for an hour, and just, you got to stay on task. Don't even pick it up and just keep right on rolling until you get that thing dried out. So anyway, guys, I think we're finally ready to go. So let's build an engine.